Welcome to Boring Conversation, a Malifaux podcast.
And welcome back to Boring Conversation in the second part of our exciting new content reveals, thanks to Wyrd Games. So, as I alluded to in the last episode, we were actually going to split our content reveal up into two eps. In this one, I'm joined by two new guests, both of whom are very outspoken members of the community at large, and in particular, the Ten Thunders and Bayou faction. So, without further ado, let me introduce our two guests. Returning to the show is Maeve Fox to talk to us about Brewmaster 2. Say hi to everybody, Maeve.
Hello, everyone.
Hello to you, too. And for our secret guest, the ringer that I called in, we have the illustrious Ray Flynn of Third Floor Wars fame to talk to us about Youko and the Ten Thunders faction. Say hi to everybody, Ray.
Hello, how are you doing today?
I'm just dandy. So before we get into the rest of the content, I'm just going to go through the disclaimer that Wyrd gave to us right off the top. Since we are still talking about the same master reveals, everything is still going to hold true from the last episode, but we'll just give it a go just for the heck of it. So this material was provided to us for review by Wyrd Miniatures. The views and opinions expressed throughout the content are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy, position, or opinion of Wyrd Miniatures. Hey, we got it out of the way.
I might add on to that of anybody else, too.
Yeah, no kidding. So before anything else, I guess we should probably talk about what we're drinking. So tonight I have a Saison DuPont. It is generally considered among the beer world as the gold standard of the Saison style, which is a Belgian farmhouse style beer. Generally, it's going to be fairly firmly hopped, nice sharp bitterness, lots of interesting yeast character. You get some what are called phenolics, which are going to give you some clovey tastes. You're going to get some almost like slightly banana-y tastes, and then some other hard to pin down sort of funky flavors. Generally well carbonated, brisk, and a wonderful late summer beer. And one of my personal favorites. If I had to pick one of my favorite beers in the world, this would probably be like in the top 5. So, Maeve, what are you drinking tonight?
I am celebrating the slight turn of a little cooler weather, and I am drinking a Woodchuck apple cider.
Ooh, man, I almost tucked into some ciders today too. I have like a salted cider with a little bit of like a citrusy flavor to it in the fridge. It's called a Goes style cider. I was like this close to picking that instead, but that sounds really good. It's definitely coming into cider season here.
Yeah, it's not an everyday, like every time I pick up, but every once in a while, when you need a break from Guinness.
It's true. And incidentally, Guinness and cider, usually strongbow, but Woodchuck would do in a pinch, are actually really good when you mix them together. Have you ever tried that?
I have not, but that sounds
You
good.
should. So pour a half a glass of the cider, and then flip a spoon over and pour the Guinness on top of the spoon so it floats on top of the cider, and then you get two distinct layers. And then when you take a sip, the cider slides underneath the Guinness, and you get Guinness in the top of your mouth and cider in the bottom of your mouth. It's pretty cool. And then Ray, we talked a little bit before the podcast, and I gotta say I'm kind of jealous of what you're having tonight. So tell me what you got.
So I am the non-alcoholic member of the team for tonight, but I'm doing a black cherry soda. I'll kind of do the same thing you just did in much less detail. But if you are the connoisseur of craft beers, I happen to be a big fan of craft sodas. So for me, I'm doing a Fireman's Brew black cherry, which I happen to really like the balance between the carbonation and the sweetness. It's not too overbearing, but it's got a nice pack of a punch for the black cherry flavor. So It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. We got a couple of like smaller, like independent soda makers that have popped up in my neck of the woods in the last, I don't know, maybe 5 years or so. And it's funny because, I'm all about, beers and ciders and wines and yada, 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 yada. Um, I went on this like real big weight loss kick a couple of years ago. And at this point, I can't even remember the last time that I had a soda. And
Yeah.
it kills me because I love them so much. And I know that the beer is just as bad, just in a different way. But I tell myself that I'm not going to drink soda. And I just deprive myself of that joy, apparently.
I don't normally drink soda, but this is a special occasion, so I figured
It
I'd
is.
liven it up a little bit.
You picked a good one, too. Black cherry soda is one of my favorites. So, yeah, that about wraps up the What You Drinking section. So, just to give everybody kind of an overview of what we're planning to do with this particular podcast, we're not going to go through the cards in detail. We might, read off individual abilities if they're complex, or the things that we're talking about need a little bit more elaboration, just because they are new. But in this episode, rather than going through the cards, ability by ability, point by point, we're really going to be talking about more of the second level stuff. How do these masters and this new enforcer fit into the two factions? When are you going to take, Youko Unseen versus original Youko, or Brewmaster Moonshiner versus original Brewmaster? When are you going to take Shojo? When are you not going to take it? When are you going to take it out of keyword? In the case of 10 Thunders, that's certainly an option. How do you combat these crews? That sort of thing. So we're going to take it kind of step by step. If anybody has any comments or anything, especially because these are, all very new and we're going to be talking about somewhat higher level play with them, feel free to join in on the Discord channel, comment on the Facebook page. We'd love to get some conversation going, especially where there's going to be so many opinions about these models from all over the community at large. So that said, let's start off with how these titles fit into the factions. So Ray, why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on Youko. How does she fit? We'll go from there.
So if I'm 100% honest, she doesn't really fit particularly well into the faction. And here's why I say that. So let's be clear. First of all, she's a lot of fun to play. She's going to infuriate your opponent. There's going to be some salt. Her hidden ledger ability is it's not a feel good ability. And that's just, you just kind of have to accept that when you go into playing the game. I honestly think you should warn your opponent about it if they don't already know, because the first time you black stain a 13, it just feels so bad. But the thing about how she fits into the faction, though, she isn't really bringing anything to the table that isn't done better or more effectively than any other keyword right now. There's no situation I personally can think of right now where I would be like, oh, I have to take Unseen into this pool because it's perfect for her and no one else can do that job. So you're playing her because you like what she does, which I think is a perfectly fine role to be. But there's not anything in particular that you're going to be like, oh, good God, I have to take, Unseen here. The one caveat to that, though, is I will say that as far as uniqueness goes for inside the keyword, inside the faction, no other keyword has the ability to recur severes like Unseen and Qiangong do. Because between her information broker and Kunoichi, if you take 2 Kunoichi, you can feasibly return 4 severes to your hand over the course of your turn. And, that's pretty unique. But it doesn't win games is the problem, right? It's like you still have to win the game.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, the sense that I've gotten from playing a couple of games with her is that she kind of fills the same gap that original Youko did. I mean, you would play this Youko into, generally speaking, probably pretty much the same pools that you play the original, and you sacrifice a little bit of the control and a little bit of the discard to gain a little bit more mobility, which is something that Qiangong may struggle with, especially with some of its bigger models. And you're gaining a little bit more offensive ability that you have to be kind of careful about applying.
Yeah, and that's like the big thing, right? Like the mobility, the mobility variance between the two crews is actually going to be fairly severe because like Bunraku are very fast, but by and large, they're the only Bunraku and Hinamatsu, the puppets of Chiangong, are the fast models in Chiangong. Now Youko 2, Unseen, she joins that ranks, and then the gather intel ability kind of pseudo speeds up the rest of your crew. So you gain a lot more mobility. So it kind of changes up a little bit of where you would take Chiangong into because you do have that new flexibility now. But I do kind of agree though that like if you were considering Youko 1 before, you're probably also considering Youko 2.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it is going to depend on your your meta and what you expect to be playing into.
Yeah.
There's a couple of kind of bad matchups for Youko 1 that Youko 2 doesn't really suffer from quite as much. Like an extreme example would be like Molly. You know,
Right.
you
Yeah.
don't want to play Youko 1 into Molly. And now that's like a one-on-one master. Like you're not really going to be able to guess what your opponent's taking. But this version of Youko doesn't really have the same issues and actually has some strong play against Molly that original Youko didn't really have.
Yeah, because
And
you're not worried about not being able to gather intel more than once a turn. Like if you do it once during the game during that particular turn, you're generally fine to do other things. Whereas you really wanted to use Yoko's range distraction ability like multiple times.
right. And you also don't have to worry about, original Youko is going to force some discarding on your opponent, which in some
Yeah, which they
situations
love.
they would actually like it. Now,
Yeah.
again, Molly's kind of an extreme example there. But another thing that I think this Youko does very, very well is she is an AP multiplier.
Yes.
Which is not really something that original Youko does. So what I mean by that is that she's taking one of her AP with Gather Intel, for instance, is the perfect example. She is translating it into an AP for another critical model that is also causing two additional effects. So it's either causing a melee attack, which is what you're going to be taking pretty commonly. It's going to be causing the scheme marker to be dropped, winning you a point, and of course multiplying that AP again. And she has the potential to pulse out quite a bit of distracted with that ability, which is sort of an AP negative for your opponent. So that one use of Gather Intel can potentially result into 3-4 equivalent AP, depending on how it's applied.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you kind of get a little bit in addition to the AP multiplication. She's also enhancing the AP of her other models with like the Whispered Lies ability on the front of her card.
Absolutely. And I do think that when you're making the decision about whether or not you're going to play Unseen, the number one ability you're looking at is the trigger for draw out secrets on Gather Intel. That trigger and the fact that it's on a stonable master and a stonable model and it only needs a 4 to go off and it's unresisted means that you have a tremendous amount of flexibility for doing scheme marker related shenanigans. And we'll touch more on that later. But I think that's kind of like, for me, that is point number one. Where you're looking about, okay, where in the faction am I going to take Youko? Or where I'm going to take Youko 2? Where do you want to abuse the draw out secrets from Gather Intel? That's the first question to answer.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I've talked about, in a couple of private conversations and then here and there on like the Explorers group chat with regards to Ivan and the Syndicate models in particular, and why I feel like, while his crew may have taken a few hits going into the current Gaining Grounds, draw out secrets as a trigger is so much stronger now than I think it has been at all, either in book schemes GG0, GG1. I mean, it's an ability that I think a lot of people would easily, would just kind of look over, but it's one that scores points and wins games. And to your point, having it on something that is unresisted, because usually draw out secrets is on an opposed duel. Usually it's on an attack. You only need a 4 of tomes. That's not that hard to get.
Yeah, especially considering you have information broker, right? So it's like, and it's like that's what makes her fun. Honestly, that's what I said before, where you play her because you want to play her because you like what she's going to do. The ability to use the pass tokens she's generating, you're generating 4 pass tokens a turn, even if your opponent's revealed no schemes, as long as you can keep Chio on the center line. So you get Chio on the center line, which oftentimes can happen turn 1. You're getting 4 pass tokens a turn. That means if you set up your board properly, you can guarantee that activation control. Because that's the danger with activation control, is that you're giving your opponent a chance to do things, so you have to survive what they're doing so you can do what you wanted to do on contested. And one of the really good things you can do here is you can do things like, I've made you go first so that Youko activates last. Now I'm going to, gather intel twice and drop 2 scheme markers. And, I didn't have tomes in my hand, but I have information broker, and there's 2 tomes in my discard pile. So we're good to go.
Yeah, and I think that ability to do some schemey stuff that maybe original Youko would struggle to pull off.
Yeah.
Because there's really not a lot of scheme marker dropping stuff in the keyword in general. Like, they don't really, unless I'm mistaken, they don't have any Don't Mind Me's, right?
I don't believe so. No, there's no don't mind means. The normally the best way you drop markers is Bunraku, because Bunraku have the bonus action to push out, and then they just walk away, drop a marker.
Right. So I think that we're both kind of on the same page with that. Gather Intel is probably her hallmark ability. Hidden Ledger is the brutal one, but Gather Intel is the one that's gonna win games.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that ability on its own is what truly differentiates her from original Youko.
Yeah, because so to go back to your point earlier, and again, we'll touch more on this a little bit later, but the strats you're looking at are basically going to be the same. You're still not going to go into turf war. You're still, prefer to not have to deal with symbols because it requires a little bit too mobility, spreading out a little too much for what you're doing. You're still looking at like corrupted ley lines, and break the line is a good scheme is a good strat for Unseen. But those were good strats for vanilla Youko as well. So it's really coming down to the variance is going to be that the orientation of what schemes had high value of scoring 2 points versus not has shifted slightly. And the purest reason they've shifted is because of Gather Intel. And move 6 on Youko, right? Like move 6 on Youko is not insubstantial. Being able to double walk 12 and then gather intel to drop a marker on Youko is like
after you move another 5.
yeah, exactly. So you have what, 17 inches of non-linear movement. And then you drop a marker at the end of that. You can just drop a breakthrough at last activation out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
So it reorganizes the scheme potential, but you're still looking at the same strats.
I think it's important too to note that this Youko, if you throw Silent Protector on this Youko compared to the other one, if Assassinate is in the pool, they're probably not even going to try. Like between Slippery Stealth and Silent Protector, giving her hard to kill, like she's takes so much effort just to get into.
Yeah.
And honestly, I kind of like the idea of challenge on her as well. If you challenge somebody from 8 inches away, she has stealth, so they have to move into range to hit her for range first. That's 1 AP down already. Basically a slow. And she has slippery, so they have to get into base contact with her to attack her, which could possibly be 2 AP or 2 actions just to get into range to deal with her.
And that's assuming they don't have distracted.
Right.
Yeah.
So that puts her on that puts a huge amount of hand control, right? Because they're having to discard cards. If you put that on their beater model, like they either have to choose not to use that beater model or drop more cards from their hand when they're also distracted. Like it makes her a very difficult to deal with master when she's sitting in the middle of kind of her crew of models passing out gather intel, and they have to like get through layers just to get to her, and when they get to her she's hard to kill, so she just pops around,
Right.
fucks
And
off, and is gone.
that's one thing That's one thing that ties back a little bit to what we were talking about, where I, I personally feel like a lot of the models in Gong are some of the stronger models in the faction. Um, but it was always difficult to leverage them. Leverage. Um, because
We'll let that
um,
one go.
yeah, I know. Because they struggled in a lot of senses to scheme. They sometimes struggled a little bit with durability. They kind of had like a little bit of defensive tech with the distracted, but it wasn't very reliable. And it was a keyword that had a lot of potential, but if the game veered the wrong way, it would fold. And I feel like that is something that this version of Youko really reinforces is the abilities of the keyword. She herself has a lot more synergy amongst models and is not as much of a solo operator. Whereas the original Youko, I mean, you could theoretically just play that and then all versatiles and not really bother with very much of the keyword stuff. This is a Youko that really incentivizes taking at least several keyword models. This probably still some flex for some versatiles, but
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
that's one of the things that really stands out the most to me, because you're probably going to be hiring very differently with this Youko than you did with original Youko if you leaned too heavily on those all-star, out of keyword and versatile Thunders models.
I think there's still a lot of powerhouses that one of the things that 10 Thunders really does have going for it is it has some really strong versatile models that are basically for all intents and purposes, there's 3 or 4 of them that are never wrong picks. You might use them wrong, but they're not wrong picks in and of themselves. And I think that you can still do that with Unseen. But I totally agree that and again, we'll get to this a little bit later. There are models that she's going to dust off from the shelf now. And to Maeve, one of the things, since you brought up upgrades, another upgrade that's really, really good on Unseen is, conveniently enough, Trained Ninja.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. Giving a move 6 master who is slippery with the gather intel ability that she has unimpeded is really good. And on top of that, her move 6 with the range 8 on the kunai is fantastic. Oh, it's a lot of reach because, and then once you're within 8, you're within range for all of your other things. So it provides one of the biggest issues I have with Unseen is, generally speaking, you either need to have a lore model to bring her up or you need to walk once or twice to get into position. It's way less bad feeling if instead of walking, you're charging and giving something critical stunned.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
One of the first things I saw when I went looking at the crew, trying to and me, I try to look at everything as sideways as possible. The first thing I saw is one of my favorite abilities that never, ever, ever actually gets any use because they gate it behind a tome on a minion every single time is Kabuki Warriors have New Horizon, and Whispered Lies
Yes.
gives them the tome.
Yes.
That is awesome.
What's great about it is it means you can wing, right? And you can still affect the center of the board or the outskirts of the board and play that kind of midfield with it. Because it's, especially for like things out flank, you draw out secrets and then you activate, you drop a marker, you activate your Kabuki and be like, yeah, that secret is now on the far horizon.
Yeah, I was just saying, I really liked that. Like, that was the first thing I looked at was like, okay, so they can do their job and they can kind of hold down a model for a turn or two and, do some damage. And they can also use that New Horizon and fling the marker. So that gets it out of that enemy territory where it's the marker is safe, the marker is in that position. It also means that you don't have to be as precise when you drop markers because you can fling them to the position you need to be, so you can kind of control like where the fight's going and then also control where your scheme markers are going.
Yeah. Or your opponents for that matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
And New Horizon, that's a good call out. It's something that I hadn't really thought about with Whispered Lies. Um, it, you know, I play Bayou as well. Obviously, everybody knows that. I want to love Wong's crew so badly, and it just never really works. And one of the things that always did work when I do play the crew is the New Horizon ability on the lightning bugs. The reason that it works is because they, as a 5 point minion, have the ability to guarantee the suit.
Yeah.
And being able to guarantee the suit with their glowy tokens changes New Horizon from a trash ability into one that denies points all day and all night. Every single time I would use those models and I would flip that switch to use the bonus ability, it's always infuriating for my opponents. And then having played other models with that same ability, like the Kabuki Warriors and the Last Blossom model. Oh, geez, the Last Blossom Bandit. What's it called?
Oh, Woko Raider.
Woku Raiders. I've never used New Horizon ever on either of those two models because I never have the card for it.
I've used New Horizon on Kabukis once out
Yeah.
of all of M3.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a strong ability, and that it's not something that I had really thought about. So we'll talk about stuff like that when we get into the combos section for sure. But I think from a position in Thunders that probably kind of summarizes things pretty well. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Ray, before we move on to Brewmaster?
I will say two quick things. Number one, that despite the defensive tech that Yoko 2 has, that does make her very intensive to get into. If you do get into her, she dies.
Yeah, she folds.
She just crashes and burns. So don't do that. Don't let your opponent get into her like that. The other thing is backstab is 100% a trap. Don't use it. Don't, it is there's an armored model that has low health and I'm going to go finish it off kind of situation. But reducing distracted to gain damage is horrible. I don't know why she just doesn't have unexpected ferocity, which would have been much better and made that ability feel much, more powerful. 7-inch or 7 stat, great. 0-inch, not so great. It's just the best part about that particular attack is that you get a reposition off of it. But if you need to reposition, you're just going to gather intel. So, I mean, it's a very niche ability. So don't be trying. I wouldn't be trying to line up charges into somebody because like, oh, I ignore armor. She can one round a Peacekeeper. Don't get me wrong. She can absolutely one round a Peacekeeper if you set it up properly. Ignoring armor is very powerful, but it shouldn't be like the primary thing you're trying to do with her. You're not taking Unseen because she has backstab.
Right. Yeah, it's a finishing move. I mean, really what you do is you see a model, probably an armored model that can't use soul stones, something that's vulnerable and at that 5 to 6 wound, level. And then you say, okay, it's worth me spending my master's activation to kill this armor 2 brick of a model. So you get into position. Hopefully you already have a focus on you. You information broker to draw 2 severes into your hand, charge, cheat a severe for the attack, cheat a severe for the damage, deal 6 to it, and it's dead. Yep. Aside from that, you probably don't use backstab.
Yep, pretty much. There's a couple of models in particular that are really, really annoying models. I think Guardian is one of them, where it's like just like a 5 wound take the hit model that has armor 2 and just makes you hate your life in guild. And like you sure dive her into that because she'll hit it in 1 or 2. She'll kill it in 1 or 2 hits. But other than that, if you are getting that close to the action, she's going to get pasted.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. So let's move on to the Brewmaster side of the equation. So, Maeve, how do you think Brewmaster fits into the faction, and how does he compare to his original version?
So as far as comparisons to the original version, you've got the difference between Finesse Control Master and Brewmaster Moonshiner, and the original Brewmaster, who is sort of a control through middle of the board. Like it's almost like Brewmaster 1 invites you to the party. Brewmaster 2 brings the party to you. It's the best way I can think to describe it.
Yeah.
And like I really enjoy, and I'm the thing is, like, thinking about it, when we were doing a lot of the playtesting, I don't think we considered the ramifications of the model choices when you're building your lists. Because when you went into, a playtest game, you were like, I'm playing Brewmaster 2, I'm playing Pandora 2, let's see what happens. So I really, until people started talking about titles, I really didn't think about like the impact of, I'm choosing Brewmaster. Now you get to decide which Brewmaster you think I'm taking, because like Brewmaster 1, you really want that offensive condition removal. Like, you've got to get that poison off of Brewmaster, or he's going to punch your lights out. This one puts out so much passive poison that poison removal isn't going to do anything, because about the time you get all the poison off of them, they're just going to have 3 or 4 more. Like the
Right.
whole
I mean, he literally has a front of card ability that says enemy models can't remove the
remove it.
poison
Yeah.
condition from your friendly models. Like,
Yeah.
taking offensive condition removal with the intent to do that, it simply doesn't work.
Yeah. So
And then he's going to like to your point, he's going to splash out so much poison that the effectiveness of your condition removal on your own models is going to be minimal.
won't matter. Yeah, because everybody's gonna take 1 or 2 poison, and the implications of when I first started playing Brewmaster, I focused really hard on Barroom Brawl because it's a splashy, cool ability. The best ability on his card is Tipsy Slide. It's insane because it moves pretty much every model within 8 inches of him at the end of the turn. Like, it changes the board at the end of every turn.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
that's
he's a master
big.
that you literally cannot take any position-based schemes against, rather, and especially if it's going to be anywhere near the center of the table, and
Right.
expect to score any points
Right.
on them. It's just not going to happen.
You're scoring your first point of ley lines, maybe your second point of ley lines. You're never getting that third point of ley lines.
Yeah.
Never.
Yeah.
Like,
And if he sniffs out that you have claim jump, you're not
Yeah.
going to score it.
yeah, you can't score claim jump.
Yeah.
Research mission's going to be harder. Like,
Yep.
every like you said, every positional scheme is going to be harder. So I don't know. I feel like savvy players are just going to be like, we're just not going to tech against him, because like, we're not going to, you're not going to tech against either one or the other. We're just going to have to play the game, because it's going to be so hard to figure out which tech you bring, against
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah, I mean, I feel like there are. We'll get to this when we get into the counter section. But it is difficult, I feel, to tech against this version of Brewmaster. There are a few things that come to mind, but I mean, frankly, I think it's even difficult to tech against the original Brewmaster. It's just playing your game the right way and accepting the fact that you're going to lose a couple of key models and just working with that.
Yeah, pretty much. As far as where he sits in the faction, I mean, when you look at the faction on the whole, it's a fairly aggressive faction. Ma's pretty aggressive. Salmer's pretty aggressive. Um, even Wong, depending on how you play him, is pretty like. Zoraida is our only like real serious control master outside of Brew, one who is a different sort of control. So this brewmaster fits into a very different way to control the board. Controlling the board through unresisted movement is honestly kind of new to the game in general. Like, scatter exists on a couple models, but this is so much better than scatter.
Yeah, this is, essentially a board, well, not really a board wide, but a very large bubble, essentially a 17-inch bubble of scatter.
Yeah, of everybody.
Mid-turn and end of turn.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to play around. What's the ability that makes it so you can not be moved when an enemy effect moves you? Is
Laugh
that laugh
off.
off?
Laugh
Yeah,
off.
so
Yeah.
we'll talk about laugh off when we get into the counters
Yeah.
piece.
I
That's the
don't
big one.
in that same vein, I don't think you want to bring him in Neverborn too often because they have a lot of planted roots. So, I was talking in one of the other discords the other day, and they were talking about how GG2 tends to play on the center line a lot. Unless you're playing Symbols of Authority, like, that third point of ley lines, the third point of turf war, break the line is all very center board based. And most of the schemes, you don't really have to be too far on your opponent's side of the board to score. Research mission, breakthrough. Um, that's pretty much it. Like, there's not a lot of forced position. Those kind of like force yourself to move all the way across the board. So this guy can basically just pick the center of the board and say you're not scoring any of those schemes, and that's not something you really fully expect from those kind of movement tricks like that are not what you really expect from Bayou. So I think he does change up a lot of like how we want to play.
Definitely. And another thing, this is a big consideration for me, and it kind of plays on another angle of the way that he plays, where we talked about like, originally you look at Barroom Brawl and you're like, well, this is the bee's knees, and then you eventually kind of move over to Tipsy Slide being the more powerful ability. But one thing to definitely make mention of, and this is something that maybe a lot of players that aren't Bayou players don't realize, Bayou has a very difficult time dealing with any sort of damage mitigation, be it armor, shielded, incorporeal, even hard to wound and hard to kill. There's a lot of spiky damage tracks in Bayou that really penalizes both of those abilities. This version of Brewmaster literally gets around all of that. Every single one of these damage mitigation abilities he doesn't really care about. Hard to wound turns into a positive flip for him instead of a negative. He has a ton of incidental ping damage that gets around hard to kill and helps to soften the blow on damage tracks getting tapered back because of hard to wound on some of his other models. He gets around incorporeal like no other model I think I've pretty much ever seen. It's kind of incredible how fast he can shred some of those models. He's a model where if you expect that your opponent's going to be bringing a Karai or a Hoffman or something like that, he's one of those masters that truly has answers to any sort of damage mitigation or even combinations of different sorts of damage mitigation. So that's a pretty big deal for Bayou. I know new Ma obviously has armor piercing on her weapon.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
so we are seeing a little more of that. And like Ophelia was always really good at pinging down stuff too. But I think he can do this without actually targeting models,
right.
which is really nice. Like he can ping
He
you.
does it without having to spend a ton of resources.
Mhm.
So like Ophelia can ping something down to death, but then she has no hand left.
Yeah.
This guy just kind of does it.
I think another thing too that we haven't seen a lot of in Bayou is pure activation control. And Shojo absolutely has the ability to give him activation control with her stupid ability. I think it's so good. What is it? Um, Trade secrets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be that Bayou didn't have any access to pass token generation. Now, pass token generation is a relatively rare thing anyway.
Yeah.
But now all of a sudden with the Bayou starter box and then with this Brewmaster and Shojo, we've suddenly got multiple options for pass token generation. So I think that's something that anybody playing into Bayou is going to have to be very aware of. Obviously, Shojo is only going to show up in Brewmaster, and we're not really talking about the Bayou starter stuff right now, but it's something that previously was not an issue at all, and now suddenly it's something you really have to pay attention to.
Can we just go ahead and agree that that either version of Brewmaster is not bringing a party to anyone? This is not my idea of a party. I did not sign up for this. I don't know who decided to call it a party, but they're wrong.
Yeah. So we were talking about this in our store's messenger chat the other day. So original Brewmaster is, when he works, is a seriously negative play experience. Even more so than I think Jackdaw and potentially even Pandora can be. He can be real bad, like real bad. This one is bad, but in a different way. At least this guy tries to make it fun while he's giving you a terrible time.
Unresisted ping damage and the inability to do positional schemes at all doesn't seem like fun. I mean, I'm just going to go out on a limb there. I mean, I know Unseen has Black Stain. I get it. Losing a 13 really, really sucks. But unresisted ping damage. Lots of unresisted ping damage.
More than I thought it would be until I started playing him. Yeah,
Ray,
that's
I'm gonna put you in my Wayback Machine, right? And we're gonna step back to second edition. And I want you to remember.
No.
I want you to remember a specific game you played against me with Brewmaster when he was still Thunders.
Yeah.
And one of the only games I ever walked away from the table.
Yeah.
I want you to remember that.
No, I remember. Why do you think I'm so salty? Brewmaster's not 10 Thunders anymore. I can't do it to other people. I refuse to buy into Bayou. It's a moral imperative. I'm going to pull a real genius quote. It is a moral imperative. I will not buy into Bayou.
Well, so here's a little spoiler alert for you, Ray. When you buy Youko and Shojo, you will automatically have bought into Bayou because you're going to get Brewmaster in the same box.
I know. It's like, don't tempt me, Frodo.
I know. And you already have a bunch of models that'll work with him.
I mean, the worst part is I actually have quite a bit of Brewmaster kit already just unassembled chilling because 10 M2. So it's I get the new Brewmaster Thailand now? Well, I might as well just play Brewmaster.
You've already got the Tanuki, the Fermented River Monks, the Akaname.
Yeah. I think I have Moon Shinobi, I have Wesley, I have a Whiskey Gammon unassembled, or a Whiskey Golem somewhere unassembled. I think I actually have Whiskey Gammon too. It's ridiculous.
So what's going to happen is 3 months from now, we're going to report back and you're going to tell me how your first Brew 2 game went. Okay.
I'm going to get banned from my meta is how it's going to go.
I'm okay with that.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Ray and I are locals and really good friends. And we, all throughout second edition and through most of 3 until pandemic crap happened, we have had some really epic games. There's been quite a bit of a friendly rivalry that extends not only to Malifaux, but to board games and other things as well. So,
and the last time we had a showdown in M3 with a Brewmaster in specific was at a local tournament.
Yeah, for top table spot or second table spot.
Yeah, and spoiler alert: Brewmaster did not make it alive.
He cheated. He used Dreamer and Zoraida.
I did. It was totally cheating. It was totally cheating. So it was our first multi-master tournament, and I said I'll play Dreamer and Zoraida because it's horrible, and I'm trying to prove that multi-master is horrible. And I never had put them on the table prior to that. I hadn't played either of them in M3E yet. And I walked in and was undefeated, and it was like, this is just.
But we did come out of that though after we finished that game and sat down, and I realized that because I hadn't faced it before, I didn't really know how to deal with it. But when we talked that back, I think we had decided that I could have probably pulled it out if we'd re-racked and played again.
Yeah, absolutely. Brewmaster, it's like Jesse just said. Brewmaster 1 works. It is a horrible MPE. All right. I'm maybe not an MP. I don't know if I'll go that far. I don't like to call things MPs in general. But it can be very feel bad. You're just sitting there going the whole bloody time, and you just feel like you can't do anything. But if you don't let Brewmaster 1 get set up, you can kind of deal with that. Brewmaster 2 doesn't allow you to do that. You just don't get the ability to set up because Brewmasters 2 is just going to do its thing, and that thing is hurt you in the face with poison a lot. Another round is absolutely like ridiculously good. Drunken Clarity, speaking of scheme marker shenanigans, open the gourd, like really? That's your bonus action? Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Cool.
I think Open the Gourd might be probably one of the best bonus actions that I've seen
The
in the game.
fact that it lasts until his next activation
is
just
ridiculous.
so good.
And it has swift action. Swift action. Just I'm just gonna throw this on a whiskey golem and a whiskey gammon and be like, ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Or one thing that's easy to forget, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the gammon because a lot of times they're off on the flanks. So let's say he's activating towards the end of the turn and he needs to use Drunken Clarity to drop a scheme marker right next to one of your models that has poison on it. And then he uses Open the Gourd and makes the Whiskey Golem and that scheme marker into hazardous or a 2.
Yeah.
And then it lasts until the next turn and he starts pushing all your guys around in both those auras. It's very bad.
And he can also do stupid things like, oh, we're playing against Coffin Lady Justice. Let's just make that coffin hazardous so when they have to get into range to do all their stuff, they're taking poison damage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty good, is all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, and that gets a little bit into one of the things that he brings to the faction that it didn't necessarily have, and that's one of them is the Drunken Clarity, which is the ability to drop scheme markers without a flip, without a duel, more or less anywhere that you want, or removing scheme markers at range at the low cost of a 6 ram with his trigger on another round, while you're also getting to use the abilities on another round, which are on their own pretty amazing.
And let's not forget the fact that it generates a soul stone if you do that, so you can just stone with impunity. It's like, oh, what's that? I have 4 stones. I'll just use one, remove that marker, deny you a point. I get a stone back. Oh, by the way, all the other things.
And outside of Ma's crew, until now, we didn't have any soulstone generation in Bayou.
Yeah, very little.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
We could steal soul stones with a couple of models, but as far as soulstone generation, yeah, I mean,
wasn't it like basically just Ma and Smuggler?
Well, yeah, smugglers they're not super duper reliable.
Right, yeah.
Ma with soulstone miners. And then like Fingers can steal soul stones. I think Trixie can steal soul stones.
But something that I think is cute is that this makes me start to look at smugglers who are a versatile model that don't get used very often.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they have that bonus action of discard a soulstone to draw 2 cards. And Brewmaster crew doesn't have a lot of card draw. So I don't mind changing a ram into 2 cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely something we can talk about that when we get into the combos and hiring decision section. But yeah, that's a very good point.
And I think this is one of the things that we're seeing shape up I haven't done as much like really looking into as much of the other factions because Bayou and Neverborn are the 2 I'm really focused on right now. But in Bayou, for sure, I'm already starting to see places where weaknesses or things, tech, I won't say weaknesses, but tech that we didn't have is coming into play. So Soulstone creation, seeing, ping damage that can get rid of armor, that sort of thing. Like, this is all new tech that, we didn't have access to.
Definitely.
And so, yeah, so I like that Bayou gets a little, because one of the things about playing Bayou is that unless it was marker removal, which we're really 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 good at, you kind of had to just play your own game and hope it worked when you went up against something that you didn't really have a specific counter for.
Yeah, to a degree, yeah.
So
sure.
Now we can tech a little bit, which is it's nice to have that.
It's a nice feeling.
Yeah.
So let's move on a little bit. I wanted to talk just a little bit about Shojo. So I think that there's probably some tech and some second level play stuff hiding under the surface of this model, and it's one that like I first looked at Shojo and I was like, this is the most bananas six soul stone model I have ever seen. It may still be the most bananas six soul stone model I've ever seen.
Nah.
We have Bokor.
We do have Bokors. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, those probably are. At any rate, initially I was really, really high on Shoujo, and then I played her a couple of times, and my enthusiasm waned a little bit. And then the more I thought about her, the more layers of the onion started to peel back, and the more things that I started to see, the more potential I started to see. So, Ray, why don't you tell me a little bit about your thoughts with Shoujo into specifically Youko Unseen. We'll talk about hiring her out a keyword afterwards, because that's a consideration for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the first thing I'm going to say is that the artwork is amazing, and I hope the sculpt is somewhere even remotely close to that artwork, because it is amazing.
You know what we need? You remember the old root beer whiskey golem?
Oh yeah,
We need Shoujo in that same color resin.
that's you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
You're going to give me a migraine talking about that stupid old model.
It's such a pain to put together.
Little tangent here. So the root beer nightmare whiskey golem is literally the only model I have ever put together for any minis game that I struggled more than I ever have to assemble. Finally got it assembled, got it on the table one time, and it broke in 3 places, and I threw it away. And bought the regular plastic nightmare whiskey golem. So I built that model twice.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay, go on.
The other thing is that how do you follow that up?
I know. When do you take Shoujo in keywords specifically? We won't worry about out of keyword stuff just yet. But Ray, why don't we start with you? What are your thoughts on her?
I think she's basically an auto take in Youko too. And I know saying any model is an auto take in a keyword is definitely victim to cries of foul, but gather intel allows you to enable distraction so well, and you have 2 great targets for that in the form of Geisha and Kabuki warriors. Not only does the distraction aura 2 inches, but gather intel's pulse for distracted, for the distracted simple duel is 2 inches. So you throw one of those into wherever you want to throw whatever cluster of models you want. And most of them are going to fail those duels, and now they're in a distracted aura. So you have at least a activation at that point that model is probably going to survive and be fine in. And then in comes Shoujo, the wonderful bearer of drinkage and slurred speech and boring conversation, and says, oh, you have a distraction aura up? Well, you need to pass a TN10 willpower duel on negatives, or you can't do anything but walk away. Oh, wait. It's a Kabuki warrior. You're engaged. You can't walk away. Oh, wait. I have my own 2-inch engagement as well. So you're just stuck.
Yeah, and she's got so much tech and so much synergy and so much combo potential, especially in Qi and Gong. I mean, like you were saying, she's got a 2-inch engage that hands out poison, which is like, okay, great. There's not a ton of synergy there in Qi and Gong, but it's got a trigger to give distracted, and Youko can give free suits to her Qi and Gong models. So now it gives you another more reliable way to give out distracted, especially because it's on a willpower attack, and then you happen to be next to a Kabuki warrior, so now you're on a negative to resist to have a drink that you're also going to get distracted from. And then she's got another ability which gives distracted and potentially pass tokens and potentially heals another friendly model for 2. Like, oh my goodness.
It's like the reason that Kabuki have always been on the shelf for me personally, and I know depending on who you ask, Kabuki are either amazing or worthless. See, case in point. The reason why they have always been on my shelf is because they have no ability to survive. Right? Like combat finesse is great and all, but your opponent flips a severe, your combat finesse does jack all. And that happens way more than you want it to. Like, let's be real. Like, we all have, the card bias. The cards are always flipping against you at always the worst and most inopportune times. And so it's like your Kabuki Warrior, generally speaking, isn't going to survive because it doesn't have any other defensive tech other than you can't cheat against me if you're in melee attacking me. One of the things that makes Shojo so great for Qi and Gong is that she is now providing another two layers of defense for your Kabuki Warrior. Number one is the boring conversation, right? So it's not an inconsequential duel sometimes to flip a 5 on a negative, especially if your deck was running hot a little bit earlier and then in comes boring conversation and suddenly it's not running so hot and suddenly you're just failing duels and there's nothing you can do about it. Or you're failing actions, there's nothing you can do about it. So that increases the Kabuki survivability. But then the other thing is she has two abilities that have the making conversation trigger. Healing 2 to a Kabuki or healing 4 to a Kabuki in one activation just gives so much more staying power to the Kabuki Warrior. And generally speaking, Shojo's going to be ignored because you got to kill the Kabuki. Shojo's is a non-issue if the distraction aura is gone. She's an annoyance at that point. So the focus is almost guaranteed to be on that Kabuki Warrior. So, and then this ties into getting the extra suit off of Youko 2, being able to just be like, hey, I'm going to distract you. You didn't activate, so I got a pass token. I'm going to use my free suit to making conversation. And now my Kabuki Warrior is going to go from, 4 HP to 6 HP. Now I'm going to slurred speech. I'm going to cheat in the RAM to get him up to, 8 HP again. And then I'm going to, hit you with have a drink, fussy company into boring conversation. And like that's so much work. That's so much synergy.
Yeah. And yeah, there's not very many other 6-point models that I can think of that can do that number of things.
Yeah, it's really
that
good.
Number of game impacting things, like not inconsequential effects.
Yeah, and like her only defense is incorporeal, which okay, fine. Like based off of everything else she does, you have to respect that. But her big weakness is she's willpower 4, right? So anyone who attacks willpower is going to have a good go at her. But in Youko 2, you're just like, there's no reason not to take her in Youko 2. And there's no reason to not take her if you have a Kabuki Warrior, especially in Youko 2. I've even, like, in the games I've tested with her, even a Geisha does wonders. Because, again, she's got that 2-inch reach. So you just get the Geisha engaging a couple of dudes. You get Shojo engaging a couple of other dudes. They're all within the 2-inch distraction aura. They're all within the 6-inch boring conversation and slurred speech auras. It's just, it's such an oppressive thing if you get it off. And Youko 2 makes it really easy to get it off.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's that combination of all of the different abilities. And then the other thing to remember too with slurred speech is a lot of times if somebody, like let's say it's early in the turn, your opponent still has a decent number of cards in their hand. You've gone early with Shojo, you've gotten off both your boring conversation and your slurred speech. Great. You're at a great position. Your opponent says, I need to hit this model or I need to do this thing, so I need to make sure that I pass my boring conversation check. I'm not near a Kabuki, no problem. I flip low. I've got a handful of cards, no big deal. So they cheat in like a 7 so that they can pass the boring conversation test, and they forget that you've got slurred speech. So then you pitch a pass token and reduce the value of their cheat by 3, and now they don't even pass the boring conversation test.
Yeah. And this goes... Oh, go ahead,
yeah.
sorry.
Go ahead. No, I finished my thought, essentially.
Okay. This goes back to kind of the thing with Hidden Ledger, right? Like, you can't not... I mean, I guess you can. But you can't not let your opponent know about that. Like, right. It is so devastatingly tilting to cheat in what you think is a passing card, and then they go, oh, I'll just remove a pass token, you're failing now. Like, it's just so bad. It's so feel bad. Yeah.
That's a table flipping moment, especially, and I talked about this in the previous episode. If you happen to have Shojo in range of a summoner,
yeah,
I don't want to belabor the point, but like you cheat in a 13 so you can, or 12 so you can get in a Jorogumo, and you already named your model and you already cheated your card, and then the Shojo's like, actually you just fail and you cheated at 12.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Or like guys who have built-in positives to get through distraction to try to attack the Kabuki.
mhm.
It's really good. The one thing I will say is I think Shojo works really well in Yoko 1 still, but I think you do different things with them. I think in Yoko 2, you really want to get her in with that Kabuki. I think in Yoko 1, you're relying on biting insult a little bit more, and she's more of a support model. And if you send her in, I think you're sending her in for slurred speech, not boring conversation. If you get both off, great. But if you have to pick between the two, you're taking slurred speech with Yoko 1, and I think with Yoko 2, you're definitely doing the boring conversation.
Yeah, and the biting insult thing with Yoko 1, I mean, I think the big call out there is that it gives you access to pass tokens in early turns.
Yes.
You're probably not going to get one turn 1 because of the range, but yeah, I mean, you could, in theory.
Depends on how aggressive your opponent is. They're alpha
It's
crews.
right. It's going to give you access to pass tokens in the middle of turn 2. Maybe turn 1 if somebody goes really aggro on you, which for Yoko 1 is kind of a big deal.
Right, exactly. And again, second verse is the same as the first. Making conversation is a ridiculously good trigger. Like one of the biggest problems Gong has, as far as like being right on the cusp of being like super powerful, is its fragility. Being able to have a model that helps with that and at such a low cost is invaluable, regardless of which title you're using. Gong's going to get value out of Shoujo.
Yeah, for sure. So that said, let's talk a little bit about Shoujo in Brewmaster 2. So, Maeve, what are your thoughts on her?
Um, I we talked about the pass token power, and she is going to have insane levels of poison in Brewmaster 2. Like I
Yeah.
think that's really where you're going to want to focus with her. Of course boring conversation is really good. Like anytime you're also having to do other duels, and since Brew doesn't draw a lot of cards, having hand pressure for your opponent is as important because it puts you on sort of an equalizing level. But honestly, like she needs 3 poison. So like if you start the turn 1 activating Brewmaster and throwing the aura on the golem, then you put Brewmaster up near the golem. You have her charge Brewmaster and give him 2 poison. She swings twice on him. She's got 2 poison already or 3 poison already right there from Trade Secrets. So literally, she gets to activate, put 4 poison on Brewmaster, or whichever model you need her to put poison on, and then at the end of her activation, she just removes that 3, and she's got a pass token right there. So she literally just generates a pass token every time she activates in that aura, and that's, I mean, on its own, like that is really good. When you add in, like you
Yeah.
were talking about, all the other levels of what she can do, like I think you're not going to use pass tokens as aggressively as Yoko does, as a King Gong crew does. So slurred speech, I think, is going to be an even more potent ability, um, because you know you're she's gonna you're not gonna want to keep those pass tokens for leverage or for other aspects. So you'll probably be more likely to use that reduce the value by 3.
Yeah, and that's one good point. Shoujo's slurred speech ability aside, in Bayou, a pass token is a pass token. That's it. There's no
Yeah,
other benefit to it
yeah,
besides that. But it's a pass token that you couldn't have otherwise gotten. And I think this is something that we talked about a little bit in the first episode, but Shoujo as a model is literally all about the gotchas. And
yeah.
it's one of those things that, like, the first couple of times an opponent plays against it, they're gonna get gotcha'd by it a couple of times in the course of the game. So the big deal for Shoujo, especially in Brewmaster, is because of the amount of poison that you can get out on her, especially in Brew 2, she gives you access to pass tokens in turn 1, which is a huge deal
Mm-hmm.
especially for a crew that isn't necessarily going to be in a position to alpha strike your opponent. You kind of want to be able to hold back, and you want to disincentivize your opponent from alphaing you while you get sort of set up a little bit. Shojo is a model that it's not like Yoko 2 where you just get 2 pass tokens at the start of the turn and your opponent can just plan for that. Shojo can
Right.
literally wait until there are like 3 models left to activate in the turn total, and then be like, oh, at the end of your activation, I'm going to get a pass token. I'm going to pass. Oh, you're going to activate another model? Great. I'm going to get another pass token, and I'm going to pass. I still have 2 models left, and it's the end of the turn, and you didn't plan for that. So what do you do now?
Yeah.
And she's the only model in the game that can do stuff like that. I mean, it's one of those things where your opponent hasn't planned for it. Most likely, they're not tracking the amount of poison that's on her. Most likely, they're not even remembering the fact that she can generate pass tokens literally anytime she wants.
Yeah.
That's where the gotchas are going to come in. And it is such a hugely powerful ability in Bayou, in Thunders. It's a game-winning ability.
Right.
Be it turn 1 or be it turn 4 or turn 5. It's a
Well,
big deal.
so the thing is too, I think Brewmaster 2 in general is going to be a very gotcha crew until you've played against it a couple times. Like I've been pulling a Cody and putting models on the table and trying to figure out like what the turn 1 is going to look like for Brewmaster.
Yeah. Yeah, you
Because
got to figure out the unpack for
yeah,
Brewmaster
you've got
2
to
for
get the
sure.
unpack, and unlike old Brewmaster where you kind of had to dirtle back into you're not moving very far on turn 1, which is fine because he has lures. He brings you to him, like I said. This one you can move up. So like I really think what you're looking at is like put the aura, start with Brewmaster, put the aura on the golem, um, basically charge him up right past the golem, and then nuke back with another round onto your other models, like right, your models. So you're pinging them, yeah, and you're pushing them up, and your opponent's going to be like, cool, their models are in the deployment zone. No, by the end of Brewmaster's activation, suddenly all the models are up, right? Like your models are now 2-3 inches up past your deployment zone, and they haven't even activated yet. Like it's almost like playing a bass crew,
Mm-hmm.
where
To a
like in
degree, yeah.
yeah, so and those kind of things are going to be tricky because then you got you activate Shojo next. She charges Brewmaster, puts a couple poison on him. She puts poison on somebody else, and she's in that aura. So suddenly she's built up enough to get a pass token. So she gets a pass token. Then your next model that you need to get up there goes, charges her, puts poison on her. Oh, cool. She gets another pass token. Like, there's every time you can kind of punch her or push her inside of that poison aura is another pass. Like you kind of have this track of like how many pass tokens am I going to get this turn, um, and that's I mean you can either use it aggressively at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
turn or you can use it to stack up at the end of the turn and get your activations after they've gone, or to get that vaunted first activation on your next turn.
Yeah,
um,
definitely. I think that we're both kind of on the same page with her. It's one that I hesitate to say that something is an auto pick, but for a 6 stone model with this much tech on it, I can't reasonably see leaving it at home.
yeah, and I think she's still good in Brew 1 as well. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she's as good because like she can give Brewmaster 2 distracted 1, which is basically focus for him. Um, so
Yeah,
she's
so I mean, let's lead into that with the we'll talk a little bit about taking her into the original versions of the Master, which we already did with Yoko a little bit. I think you're kind of right. Like, I don't necessarily know if she makes the cut with Brewmaster 1 just because the ability of Brewmaster 1's crew to put poison on her is greatly reduced. And without a good means of poison generation, She's not going to really have the pass token reserve to make the most out of slurred speech. If she's not using slurred speech to its fullest, then she's just doing boring conversation, which there's not a lot of tech to really turn that up to 11 in Brewmaster or Bayou in general. So, like, it's not necessarily something you want to rely on. I can see her being a little more situational in Brewmaster 1, especially because the hiring pool in that crew is fairly tight as it is.
Mhm.
I
I kind of
would
like
try
the
her, but I just
idea.
don't think she has quite as much of a place.
I kind of like the idea, like, let's say you're playing your Brewmaster crew and you want to hit the middle of Brewmaster 1, you want to hit the middle of the table, you want to bring your enemy into use. So you've hired Brew, you've hired Trixie, um, and you've hired Shojo, and then maybe a couple Shinobi. Or Whiskey Gammon have that really cute little pulse ability too, where they can kind of pulse out. Um, and then maybe you hire like go kind of elite. So you hire Brew, Whiskey Golem, Shojo, Trixie, and there's really no room for Fingers. But I
No.
kind of like Fingers. Fingers and Shojo, I think, go together really well.
Yeah, we're going to
Um,
talk about that when we get into the
yeah.
combos
So
a
like
little
you've
bit
got
later, but yeah.
those, and then you pop boring conversation and slurred speech. You've got an elite crew, so you're going to have pass tokens. Um, if you know you're going up against a summoner and you're going to get pass tokens, suddenly slurred speech becomes even better. And then you have a bubble of Brewmaster saying, kiss my butt. You've got the bubble of Shojo saying cool, boring conversations are just going to make it even harder, right? Like there's all of those little things that they can basically take one section of the board and say this is going to be the worst idea you've ever had coming into this. So they can deny quite a few schemes that way.
I think that's the thing with Shoujo in Bayou is that you don't go out of your way to try and get the trigger to get the free boring conversation off
No.
because the Fussy Company trigger is enemy only, which means and it's a stat 5 attack on willpower to get it off with have a drink. So it's not necessarily guaranteed. You want Shoujo going early in the turn, like first or
Mhm.
second activation, really, so that she can get the most out of her auras. Which means that you're going to dedicate a high crow, which you don't have any way of guaranteeing the suit on in Bayou.
Yeah.
So, and you don't have the ability to get those cards back into your hand like Youko 2 does. So, Youko 2 really enables the ability to get both of your bonus actions off. I think if you're playing her in Bayou, you're probably just going for slurred speech. And if you happen to draw the high crow and you can happen to budget it to get the
Yeah.
boring conversation off as well, then great, but it's probably not going to happen that
Well, and
often.
not to
So,
mention,
yeah.
Brewmaster One has a lot of uh, what is that trigger? The pulse poison trigger.
Yeah, you can hand out poison and an aura
Yeah.
or a pulse, yeah.
So yeah, that's those crows or the mid level crows are kind of important for the crew.
Yeah, there's a lot of competition for those for sure.
Hmm.
All right, cool. So, Ray, you have the opportunity to talk about taking Shoujo as an out of keyword hire. That's not really something that Maeve does. So, would you ever consider Shoujo into another crew?
Absolutely. We've already kind of discussed that her cost 6 and what she brings to the table is really potent. So bumping her up to a cost 7 actually doesn't feel too bad.
Yeah.
And she and Gong already play nicely with, like, say, Honeypot, which is where I would first probably look to bring her. This might be one of those situations where uh, she takes the place of, what Tannen would normally be. And she has a fairly similar problem that Tannen has on that she has to stay alive, but she has a lot more healing capability for herself and others because making conversation just says one friendly model within 3, so that means it can be herself. And she also has a trigger we haven't really talked about on boring conversation. She has the whole discard a pass token, drop a scheme marker. And that plays really nicely with Kitty Dumont, who has, discarded brilliance, drop a scheme marker. So you get
Mhm.
And then Gwyneth Maddox has, draw out secrets on her gun. So it's like suddenly you have like 3-4 sources of, out of quote unquote, out of engagement scheme marker dropping. And, scheme markers aren't necessarily like, massive in GG2, but there's a couple of schemes that like they're really relevant for. And, suddenly she becomes another model to help enable deathbeds, or another model to help enable detonate charges and stuff like that. So it's like I think she has some really solid play in the honeypot. Oni and Monk are probably the only other two areas I would ever really consider her. And the reason for that is because they're the two keywords that can actually get poison on her. This would be a situation where like I would be looking to bring a Fermented River Monk out, which is like, wow, really? What? Who plays that model? But how they interact with Shojo for generating pass tokens and for slurred speech with Monk is actually really cool. And because she has the ability to just toss out poison willy-nilly onto them, they use the poison for damage reduction though. So like they can just kind of like smack each other around with drinks and generate pass tokens and armor in the process. And it may not necessarily be the most efficient thing, but in the early game, but in mid game that can really matter. And again, the slurred speech and boring conversation, being able to trigger either one of those when you're already having to deal with Shenlong, could be potentially very, very not fun.
Yeah, definitely.
So those would be the three keywords I would consider playing.
What about McCabe 2 with the corpse curator? The curator can drop out not only the sludge markers, but also has that same ability the goo has. Then anything it touches gets any terrain it touches gets poison. So
I think that might be a little too cute. But also I really think McCabe 2 in particular like really wants to stay in keyword /minion. So I probably wouldn't take Shojo and McCabe 2 just because that's 7 stones I could be using for a 7-stone minion or a 7-stone keyword model that I can then do very, very nasty things with, tossing artifacts at them with.
Cool. So the next section that we have laid out is building crews. How do they differ from original titles? Honestly, we've already covered quite a bit of that, either in the discussions that we've had during the course of the first part of this episode or in the first episode. So I think there's probably a lot of it that we would just be sort of reiterating. But one thing that I'd be very interested in talking about is, are there a couple of key models that maybe you did not use previously that are going to make the cut with this one? And we don't need to wax poetic about them, but just kind of rattle them off and maybe just a quick description of why that would be. So, Maeve, why don't we go to you? What kind of Bayou models are seeing play with Brew 2 that didn't see it with Brew 1 very often?
I think you're hiring Gammon.
Yeah,
I think you're
so
hiring
too.
Whiskey Gammon. I think they're a guarantee. I think, and I need to play with it, I haven't put her back on the table because she's annoyed me so much. But I think there is room for Cooper.
You said Cooper.
I think there's room for her.
She's so bad.
She's still, she's not great. But here's my thinking.
I like Cooper.
She's a 7 Soulstone Enforcer who's fairly tough, right? And Brewmaster can push her around and ping her around, stack poison on her, and send her in. And the torch isn't bad. Like, the torch is not a terrible melee attack. So I think there's a play. I need to do more experience with it, get more experience with it, because also there's that thing of like Gammon are very squishy. They're just gonna get removed off the table. They're only minion 2, so you can only ever hire 2 of them. So I don't think you focus on her summoning. Her summoning is there when it's like, oh crap, one died. Let's get another one on the board. But as a fairly tanky, which Brews, the Tri-Chi are not extremely tanky, but a fairly tanky enforcer with a decent damage adds another condition that'll tick down at the end of the turn.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't hate her. Her heal is terrible.
It's really bad.
It makes me so mad because
You have to jump through so many hoops for
right,
such a bad heal.
you need a scrap marker to even heal a single model. I think
And
if
it has
it
to be in
was
proximity to that model.
yeah, I think if it was heal a construct and remove a scrap marker to heal another construct, I
Or
would
to
be
increase
okay
the
with it.
value of the heal on
Yeah.
that construct or
Yeah,
something like that,
but
maybe.
needing to
Yeah.
remove a scrap marker just to heal one construct is
That's
just
bad.
absurd. Absurd. Bring
That's
sparks.
bad.
If you want a healer for constructs, bring sparks. Which, by the way, sparks is kind of good in Brewmaster 2.
I mean, Sparks is kind of good, period.
Yeah,
Sparks
but
is kind of good.
so
Period.
Gammon have that charge ability where they can reduce their shielded to
Yep. To increase the damage. It's
to increase
the
the
same
damage.
thing that Metal
Yeah.
Gammon have.
So you can kind of play around with them, bop shielded on them, pack them with explosives, send them in. They're doing the ping damage from Barroom Brawl. They're doing ping damage from packed with explosives. They're doing, they're probably not going to hit on a stat 4 attack, but if they do, they
That's
do.
the trick, is that it's a stat 4 attack. I mean, otherwise you can make them essentially with enough shielded. You can make them like min 5, which
and
is
having
stupid,
him walk around tinkering in the back of your whiskey golem to make him stay alive forever is going to annoy people too.
There's something there. I think for me, aside from the stuff that we've already mentioned in the previous episode, those being, Moonshinobi with 12 cups of coffee, popcorn is a big one, whiskey gammon is a big one. The one that I really got to thinking about was fermented river monks, and it's kind of funny because Ray just mentioned them. I think fermented river monks really, really might have some play with Brewmaster 2, because the problem with them in Brew 1 is that it was always very difficult to generate enough poison on them to make them worthwhile without pulling too much poison away from Brewmaster, because you only had a finite number of AP that you could use them with, or to put out poison with. In this Brewmaster, you put up so much incidental poison that the fact that they are very poison hungry isn't so much of a big deal. I mean, they're going to use it to reduce damage, which is probably what you're going to use it for most of the time. There's also very little competition for those mid to high rams to get their drunken strength or irreducible damage triggers off. Whereas in Brew 1, you really want those rams for Brewmaster. So I feel like fitting a fermented river monk into Brew 2 is not going to be a big stretch, and I really think that they have the potential to do a lot of work.
I think they combo pretty well with Shojo as they have a lot of synergy with Shojo. So if you're bringing Shojo, like you can punch something with a river monk, increase your stat by 2, then pop a pass token to reduce their card by 3.
Yeah, it's basically a guaranteed hit on like an 8.
Yeah,
you use an 8 and you're probably gonna clip them.
And if you have drunken strength trigger and you get enough to hit that straight flip, I mean that's 6 damage coming your way.
Yeah, it's nothing to joke about. So what about you, Ray? Do you have any models that are coming out of retirement for you that we haven't already mentioned?
I mean, for me, the Kabuki Warrior, we've gone over that heavily.
Talked about that one quite a bit, yeah.
Kind of the same with geisha. Like, I've always kind of been a geisha apologist, but I think I think they're great models, especially for 4 stones. But I think probably by and large, most people don't really take geisha, and I think now you absolutely have to consider them. If you weren't before, you absolutely are now.
Are you ready for me to trigger the 10 Thunders players listening, Ray?
Do it.
Lust and Shojo are so good together.
So I don't agree with that for Youko 2.
Okay, that's fair.
But Youko 1, I run Lust Standard in Youko 1 anyways. So I agree with you there. I run a very weird Youko 1 list because I tend to bring Gwyneth, Maddox, and Lust as like my 2 big things.
I was just looking at Red in the Face and all of the willpower
Oh, yeah.
duels that
Right. Yeah.
so
yeah,
good.
Lust is real good.
Yeah, Lust is super solid. But for Yoko 2, because of the way Yoko 2 works, I think you lose some of the value of Lust because you want to be taking advantage of that distraction aura to make them fail the duels, but like one of the duels takes them out of the distraction aura, which takes them out of Shojo's range, which kind of is counterintuitive. There's enough good stuff in there that it's not the end of the world, and if you want to take Lust, I don't think it's a bad choice. But I personally would rather take Lust in Yoko 1. Yoko 2's list for me tend to be very point heavy, which we'll get into when we talk about versatiles and out of keywords. So Lust for me is probably going to stay at home for Yoko 2.
Yeah, and I know we had talked a little bit about a couple other Ten Thunders models that might be going into retirement with Yoko too. So why don't you just go over those briefly, Ray?
So Kunoichi and Charm Warders, which I know that's going to probably trigger a lot of people. Well, I don't want to say the word trigger; that's bad on him. But it might upset or confuse a bunch of people because Charm Warders are
yeah, they're kind of
really
like
good.
MVPs. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really, really good models. Kunoichi, depending on who you ask, didn't see much play either. Some people think they're great, some people don't. But I think you're really going to want Bunraku over Kunoichi for Yoko 2, just to kind of play into the mobility concept a little bit more. If you're trying to do a little bit more of a beater heavy Yoko and take advantage of being able to throw stuff in and pulse out the distracted, Unexpected Ferocity is really good in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, if you play him kind of center and you have the potential to guarantee the suits and you're already going to have the distracted up, then
Right.
yeah,
So
sure. And then Tools for the Job is great. I mean, like, that's
yeah.
half the reason you take them.
But I don't think that they're an often take. I think they're I want to take. Charm Warders, the reason I don't like them for Yoko 2 is because Yoko 2 already feels really card intensive, and Charm Warders are card intensive. And so I think when you're building a Yoko 2 crew, like because of Information Broker is so strong, you're already flipping a bunch of TNs with Yoko 2. So you already have a lot of hand pressure on yourself. And then in come Charm Warders who are hunting crows, both of a moderate and a severe nature, and they have really good triggers on their melees that you're hunting for suits for, and you want high cards so that you can force, you try to get that random discard going and stuff like that. And it's like they're good, they're really good. I'm not saying don't take them. But I think generally speaking, if you want to bring Charm Warders into a Chi and Gong crew to do whatever you're doing, you might be better off just going with Yoko 1 in that case.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, for as far as a Bayou perspective, I would say for me, the only models that probably don't make the cut are going to be Tanuki, which were kind of already on the fence after their recent adjustment. I still thought they were pretty good. They were great for handing out poison. Not as necessary anymore now that Shojo can hand out poison almost, well, actually, even a little bit more easily because she doesn't even need a TN. And just the tech that they bring isn't super necessary. There's some kind of fun combo-y stuff you can do with them, but for me, they don't quite make it.
If their thing didn't say just enemy models treat
For
scheme
the
markers as
hazardous poison aura,
that would be that they
would
would
be amazing.
they'd fit in. But I mean, like we have in that slot, you already have Akaname, and Akaname are such a good model already.
Right. And it's kind of funny because Akaname were one of the models with Brew 2 that I was going to say may also not be needed so much anymore. Although, mostly because of the ski marker dropping thing where Brew 2 can actually do that. Now, one thing to consider with them is that they're going to have access to a nearly limitless amount of flicker because of the amount of poison that Brew 2 can put out. Yeah, I mean, between using actual flicker and poison in place of flicker, there's certainly some play there. And then the other one I talked about was Cooper. Like, I know you said maybe, I don't really see a reason to take her anymore.
I'm gonna try her. I'm gonna give her a shot. I'm gonna see. You can be really cute if you want to, and use the Rockhopper's ability to make her not have to spend poison because the Gammon won't take any damage when they come out.
Yeah.
But that adds the Rockhopper into your crew, which is already
Right.
like
And
building
then
up.
Right, and then it's also a model that doesn't deal necessarily very well with being accidentally splashed poison on it.
Maybe
It's a bit of a-
Rockhopper and Brewmaster 1 if you build a construct crew. I don't
yeah,
know.
maybe.
Ugh, no, that's too
So
much.
as far as yeah, as far as out of keyword and versatile stuff, Ray, I know one thing that we've talked about in the past is the necessity to project ranged threat, and you'd already mentioned Samurai earlier in the pod, so I would say we're fairly safe in assuming that you feel like they have a place in this crew.
Yeah, I actually have tried the crew out with double samurai and a kabuki as being
You
like
dirty
my
motherfucker.
as being my three, and the force projection that provides. So here's the thing, right? Like the biggest issue that we've discussed previously with the Qi Gong is that they're potent, but they're fragile. And part of that fragility is that they don't have any range pressure. They have some ranged willpower duels, but nothing that makes the opponent go, well, I can't come in and just eat your models. Samurai make you go, maybe I shouldn't get too close. Oh darn, I have to get some. Like samurais are just those annoying models that just play well at range, play well at melee. They have armor too. They have a self heal. Like everyone knows why samurai are amazing. Youko 2 just makes them worse because now you can't lock them in because she can just rip them out. It doesn't matter how many models you have. Gather intel pushes through models. She can throw them up to get them in range so that they can take a focus shot turn one. It's just like there's so much benefit that Youko 2 brings to them. And then on the other side of the coin, like to go to pure melee, Lone Swordsman is another example of Youko 2 just being able to enable the heck out of them. Because the Lone Swordsman's biggest issue is, generally speaking, speed. Like, despite the fact that he has, I think it's Creep Along is the name of the ability, the one that you push towards an ally. Despite the fact that he has that, he generally speaking, like, you struggle to get him into range before turn, like, late turn 2 or maybe even early turn 3, depending on the board state. Youko 2 says, nah, brah, you can go up there, go get it. And then, generally speaking, if you threw him into a scrum, it's either in the bubble of death, the bubble of no that Shoyo and Kabuki already set up, or you pulsed out a poison, a distractor or two, just from natural failing of duels that they're not willing to cheat because they want the cards, and then Lone Swordsman activates and pops last breath and goes, "I'm going to eat you now,"
Yeah,
and then does exactly that.
mm-hmm.
Because the other thing about Lone Swordsman, and then I'll shut up, is he's very card intensive because you want to use last breath and you want to cheat in that severe and you want the double crit strike and you want the severe damage. And if you're able to get him in position, like, end of turn 1, end of turn 2 kind of thing, and then he activates first and nukes the ever loving god out of something, then Youko 2 can go up and pick up a couple of those severes back.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a little bit of the sting away from like tossing 3 severes out to guarantee a model dies, which is still worth it regardless. But
Yeah, now you have the benefit of actually being able to take those back.
Yeah.
As opposed to them being in the discard pile. Yeah, those are all very good points. And I think your point about Lone Swordsman being very resource intensive is a very good one. And it's one that Youko 2 helps to alleviate quite a bit.
The only other out of keyword one that I'm going to really throw out there is, as you might have noticed from the previous 2 ones I mentioned, the 2 versatile models, was beater models are a big deal. And beater models that like make you not want to be in places or make you care about willpower duels are big. And Amanozako does both of those things.
Yeah.
So I have played Amanozako with Youko 2, and it's amazing. And I'm not going to go into the details because you can just read Amanozako's card and you go, oh, okay, I get why. So yeah, if you're looking for like an out of keyword model that's going to make your opponent like suddenly wish that they weren't playing against you, bring a versatile samurai, and bring an out of keyword Amanozako, and take a kabuki, and then let them go. Oh god.
Yeah. So one really cool thing about Amanozako is how Youko has that really really good ability on her back of card that you can only use once per turn. And it takes up one of her AP, and it lets you take some cards back in your hand from your discard pile. being able to use Amanozako's bonus action to just let her do that out of activation, gaining an
Yeah,
AP.
and her pseudo obey in general is strong because you can hidden ledger twice. You can information broker out of activation, which is like you can't underestimate how powerful it is. Like, here's how powerful it is, right? Like, this is why it's so ridiculously strong. One of the reasons Amanozako is so ridiculously terrifying, besides the fact that she is terrifying, is Drink Blood. Drink Blood is a busted trigger that can keep her alive way longer than she has any right to be alive. Dark Bargain with the trigger is a bonus action. So you can bonus action to get 2 cards back, make sure one of them's a ram, and then have Amanozaku smack into something hard and be like, hey, I have this really high ram I just picked up from, thank you, Youko, too. I'm going to heal back, the 5 damage I just dealt to you.
Right. I mean, basically, you're getting to do that minimum twice per game, and more if she happens to kill some models.
And she will kill models.
And she will kill models. And you're trading a flicker that you're probably going to get back on a bonus action for a stone and a severe damage, like a guaranteed hit with a guaranteed severe, because she can just use flicker on the
and attack. A master AP.
And a master.
You're getting a master AP back. Yeah, it's massive.
Huge.
Like I said, Amanozako, player with Youko too. You probably will not be disappointed. Just don't overextend.
And talking about combo wombo, Maeve's favorite part of the show. Maeve, tell us the single most ridiculous combo that you've come up with for Brew 2.
Honestly, he combos so hard just on his own, like just by playing him, that every time I add something in, I'm like, oh, this is really, really good. I think we were talking the other day about adding Bo Peep into his crew and being like, cool, every time I hit multiple models for damage, I heal up multiple times. Like,
Bo Peep being one of the Bayou starter models that has been teased but is not in the app yet, so you'll need to go back and look at that.
Yeah.
But
she has an ability that says friendly models within 6 inches of her heal 1 for each other model that they damaged in a turn. So if you
during their activation,
during
a max of 2. Right.
So if you hit 2 models, you heal 2. If you hit 3 models, you heal 3. That sort of thing. So Brewmaster absolutely has the ability to ping around multiple models, and just do silly things with, so he can heal up. A lot of the models in his crew can heal up. So,
it's an 8-inch aura.
Incidentally,
I just looked it up.
It's even better. It's 8 inches
on a 40.
Right. So yeah, she's definitely
and she's got a once per activation ability on the back of her card. The race is on with a 3-inch pulse. Once per activation, this model and all friendly models within range may push up to 3 inches in any direction. So she can kind of stand off to the side as best she can, or just suck up the fact that she's going to gain a poison. And that first turn, she can push basically your whole crew up 3 inches through the poison aura that you just put up. So that's yet more movement on first turn while still gaining poison.
Mm-hmm.
It follows. It's
and
good stuff.
You can bring Bushwhacker or 2, which aren't terrible. Now it takes away from your keyword synergy, but if you bring a Bushwhacker to put a trap anywhere near Brewmaster, then he can just ping your guys straight through hazardous injured as many times as he feels like, because his melee attack is really dumb.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that was actually one of the things that I had come up with. That was my wacky combo was Brew 2 with, and I know I just got over teasing Tanuki for being not great, but they do have a front of card ability that makes scheme markers into hazardous poison markers. So taking a Tanuki and using Brew 2 to put a scheme marker down essentially underneath an enemy model and then knocking him around in it, or trying to stack up his ridiculous movement, out of keyword and end of turn movement stuff with pit traps by hiring in a Bushwhacker. That's something I had thought about too. I don't think it's good, but it sure is fun.
Yeah. The other
Go ahead,
thing
Maeve.
that I had thought of and it's dumb, and I apologize for this, but you know I have to bring up test subjects.
You have to.
Oh
Okay.
God.
So if you have Brewmaster in a position, you can swing on a test subject. You'd only do 1 damage to it because it's armor 1, and it pushes 1, which means it charges. So you can hit 1 and have it charge in, do its stampede. If you brought sparks, because you should if you're bringing test subjects, then they're going to stampede and be min 3. So it's this hilarious idea of Brewmaster just like, you know, chalking up on the bat, swinging at a test subject, hitting it in the ass, and watching it like just scatter across the board.
That's terrible, and I hate it.
Yeah, I was gonna say thanks. I hate it.
That might be the biggest. Oh, that's such a stretch, but I kind of love it. I'm never going to do it, but
Never
it's
do
certainly
it.
fun
Never
to think
do it.
about. How about you, Ray? What's your single wonkiest combo?
I'm gonna break you for a moment. I'm gonna give you
Sure.
3, and they're from
Okay, sure.
they're from 3 different approaches.
Go ahead. Do it up.
So the first one is Amanozako. I already talked about, right?
Sure.
Yep. Asami has another henchman, the beloved Black Betty Ohagura Batari. Her tactical action is a willpower pulse steal for slow.
I see where you're going with this, and I like it.
So yeah, normally that's actually a little bit of a difficult thing to kind of plan for or like really abuse. But if you're already doing the Shoujo Kabuki party in the middle of the table, why not throw a Black Betty in there to turn off resistance triggers, pulse out slow, rip things apart, which is good for scheming, and she has a lure just for a bonus trick. On the multi-master front, because we have to talk about it for the people who do play with multi-master. Who really likes picking up 2 high crows from the discard pile?
I think it might be Misaki.
I think it might be Misaki. A master with an execute trigger on a stat 7 that can pop up anywhere on the board. Who doesn't like 2 high crows?
That's pretty good.
Yeah, so that's that one. And then for the wonky combo, because I think those are just 2 like good combos, Kitty Dumont. So Kitty Dumont has a trigger on her melee that you can pick up cards if you don't cheat. And that works really well with Information Broker.
Yeah.
She has, I think it's called Under the Table. And basically, so for those who aren't aware of what it does, when she flips damage, all of her damage flips for negatives are treated as positives. So the goal is that you basically cheat to be on a double negative. So you're now on a double positive. And so now you get the choice of either picking the severe to do 3 damage, or you can just take, you can pick whatever card you don't want, or I'm sorry, if you cheat, you don't get to pick up any cards, but if you don't cheat, you draw any cards that are revealed and not chosen. So you get the choice of picking the severe to do a little bit more damage, or you can pick a lower card to do less damage, but now you can pick up your severe. So normally the downside to this is that, if you want to do the 3 damage, you're going to get 2 weeks in your hand. That's not necessarily great. It's not bad. It's thinning your deck, but it doesn't help facilitate things. When you're talking about Youko 2, that totally facilitates things because now Information Broker has 2 cards they can pitch to get severes back. She has Reaching Tendrils, which allows you to push targets in any direction. And it ignores friendly fire, so you can throw stuff into the bubble. It works a little bit better than Allure does because it's a guaranteed 6-inch push rather than based off of their move, and you can move it laterally as opposed to it has to go towards Kitty.
Right. Yeah,
So
if you hit the mask, you can actually put Kitty in base so that she doesn't actually lose any AP.
Right, exactly. And then you swing on them with Unassuming Demeanor, draw some cards, and you're happy to go. And then the other silly thing is that she has Brilliance Saturation on the front of her card, which is when she moves through things, they have to take move duels or gain Brilliance tokens, which is cool because she removes Brilliance off of her target to either deal more damage or to push towards them, which is cool. She has a defense duel for pulsing up, a 3-inch pulse defense duel for dealing damage and healing. And she can discard Brilliance off of herself to drop a scheme marker as a bonus. Like, she has so much utility in her kit that just plays well with Youko too. But absolutely, the wonky combo of goodness, beside all that fun stuff, is I'm gonna deal severe damage to you, pick up 2 weeks, and then I'm gonna pitch 2 weeks to Information Broker and draw 2 severes.
Yeah,
because
like,
that's not bad or anything.
I like that last combo. That's a good one. So let's talk just a little bit about the counters. I mean, I don't know. My first inclination is that there's not necessarily a ton of counter tech that you can pick into these guys, but let's see what you can come up with, Ray. So, what do you not want to see on the other side of the table when you're playing Youko 2?
Same thing. I don't want to see on the side of the table when I play Youko 1 ranged.
Yeah, exactly.
The big thing with Youko 2 that's different from Youko 1 is Youko 1 is very kind of solo independent, like doing their own thing. So like spreading out like is just kind of a thing that happens. Youko 2, you want to get at least a couple of models, generally speaking, at least a couple, one of them being a high profile model into a bubble. So don't bring a crew that bunches up. Basically, yeah. If you bring a crew that bunches up and I throw 2 models that tie up your 4, then I'm sorry, but I warned you.
Yeah, for sure. What about for Brewmaster 2? What kind of things worry you, Maeve?
So going back to master declarations where it gets really weird, Brewmaster 2 gets kicked in the face by McMorning 1. But Brewmaster 1 beats McMorning 1. And I'm not sure where McMorning 2 goes yet. So I definitely do not want to see McMorning on the other side of the board if I'm playing Brewmaster 2. Just because they don't even reduce the damage of poison, they just heal it. So everything you want to do just goes kind of out the board. So
the big ones that came up for me with Brew 2 were models with planted roots and laugh off.
Yeah.
Because that's going to make it so you can't deny your opponent's points on those positional schemes.
Absolutely.
So it's not necessarily going to shut the crew down, but it is going to help a lot, and it's going to help secure your points. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I thought about was if I were playing Brewmaster 2 and I played into Mawtucket, for instance, where she's just going to litter the board with pit traps, that is really going to cause some sort of hazardous marker generation or hazardous auras are really going to give Brewmaster 2 fits.
Jakuna, Amananzaku.
Exactly.
Yeah. You really want to see a goo across the board. The grave goo is your best friend. Bring it on. But the other hazardous auras are definitely...
Yeah, you definitely don't want to deal with hazardous with this Brewmaster. It's going to cause major problems. I think if anything is a true tech pick against him, that's probably it. Something that can put out hazardous auras an obsidian statue or obsidian oni, or there's a ton of options out there. I'm just kind of thinking about the 10 Thunders thing right now.
Yeah, vent steam is a big thing.
Vent steam is a big deal. Yep.
And it's also it's the big thing's the range, right? All barroom brawl is a 1-inch thing, right, or a 2-inch thing. So
1 inch,
yeah, right. So anything that punishes you for doing micro movements is not your buddy, and that includes the terrain. If the terrain is hazardous heavy, that's a consideration for do I take Brewy 2 into this or not?
But you also kind of like that, so it's hard to tell because you kind of like that because you're more...
You can knock them around.
You're more concerned with hazardous auras that don't affect your opponent. Mei Fang is an issue because of vent steam. Vent steam is a big issue for you because you don't... it doesn't affect their models, but it will affect your models. So
right, unless they're incorporeal or something like that.
Well, yeah, that's another animal. But yeah, if your opponent wants to be a real jerk and take multiple different sources of hazardous auras into the same crew, it's gonna tear Brewmaster apart.
Yeah, I think you shy away from taking this Brewmaster into Neverborn, just because there's a plethora of planted roots. I think we're still good in Guild, because only 2 models are going to have LLC. So, you deal with those 2 models as it goes. The one thing Guild does not recover from is getting pushed out of place a lot because they don't have as many ways to get back into place. So
Yeah, definitely.
I think you're still pretty, and plus you really you want to see Hoffman across the board. Like if they drop Hoffman and you drop Brew 2, that's a fun game for you. Like
Yeah, for sure. So, talking just a little bit about schemes and strats, because we're talking about games that make sense. So, what schemes and strats really scream to you as being great choices for Youko 2, Ray?
Outflank definitely. Detonate charges. Those two are probably the number ones. Especially if you're bringing Bunraku, which I know Youko 1 can do as well, but because Youko 2 has the ability to push models out of engagement and drop a scheme marker from 8 inches away, with a 6-inch move, like that gives you a lot of flexibility to shore up a flank that might have gotten caved in. And then detonate charges is basically an auto 2 points as long as you have models alive.
Yeah.
So definitely that. I like her with catch and release, which is like one that like I would imagine people don't really tend to go for. But again, she has that ability to just kind of move things where she wants them to be. And because you can move through models, it's a lot easier to position to score that. Same thing with spread them out. You can, if you have two models, nearby her, you can send them in opposite directions and not worry about the pulse and just drop markers. And there's two of your spread them out markers. Research mission, same thing. Claim jump is good because you can fake that you don't have it and then suddenly throw a model in there. Hidden martyrs is great. Because I think the Kabuki Geisha combo fits for Hidden Martyrs. Because I think it's 8 and 4, so they come under the 13.
Yeah.
And they have to kill at least one of those models. So you're guaranteed at least 1 point.
It's
if
that
not
second point that's a trick.
But yeah. But
it always is.
It always is. But those would be the big ones for me for Youko too.
What about you, Maeve? What kind of stuff screams Brewmaster 2 to you?
kind of the same, honestly. Like claim jump is big because you can just push everyone out of the claim jump range. Like you put your model there. At the end of the turn, they get pulsed away. So you can pretty easily take claim jump. You can pretty easily do catch and release because your model's there, then it gets pushed out of the way, and it
Whiskey
can run
Gammon
off.
in particular are very good for catch and
Yeah.
release because once they get away, you're going to have a hell of a time catching them.
I think that you can, because of Drunken Clarity and Akaname, spread them out. It's not an issue.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
If they let you, if they just let a Whiskey Gammon do its thing, it can do breakthrough real easy. There's not. I think it's easier to say which ones do you not take, right? Like, you
sure.
don't. Research missions not great. If your opponent is handing you markers, then it's pretty good. But otherwise,
that's one of those situational choices. Yeah.
Brewmaster does deathbeds all on his own. I think so. Just because you can Drunken Clarity next to something and then punch it to death and move it into position to be where you need it to be.
Then it's just choosing the right kind of marker and making sure you have access to it. I mean, I think the big one for me to look out for with Brewmaster, and a lot of times you wouldn't necessarily think this with a moderately killy crew, but you do have to be careful of Vendetta, just because you're always going to hire a Whiskey Golem. Your opponent always knows you're going to hire a Whiskey Golem, and it's 10 freaking points, and they're probably going to bring some kind of tech to deal with it, which makes it a pretty juicy Vendetta target. So you do have to be kind of careful about that.
Which is why I think if Vendetta's in the pool, you charge up. You bring Sparks with you, and he's gonna shield it,
a possibility,
and heal it, and
Yep. I mean, this crew is particularly good in my opinion for Let Them Bleed more so than most, because it has a lot of incidental damage that it can use to whittle away at big models. It also has a lot of incidental healing to keep itself above the point that your opponent would score. I do think that this crew is pretty good for Assassinate, because this Brewmaster is he's kind of the same thing as Youko too. Like, he's difficult to get to grips with, but if you do get to grips with him, he's going to be in a little bit of trouble. The butterfly jump helps a lot with that. So he's somewhat more defensive than Youko 2 is, but he is difficult enough. He's very, very, very slippery without having the slippery ability. So it's difficult to get him nailed down. So I do think that he can pull off an assassinate game
I
as
will
well.
say one thing to that originally I was kind of like maybe I should take this, and then I realized it's not great. Um, I was originally thinking ghillie suit would be really good on him, but ghillie suit specifically, or this guy specifically says he cannot be charged. It's not a may, he cannot be charged. So
Right.
a
You
lot of
have to be
your
able to charge him.
right, a lot of your tech to get poison on him early is stopped through that. So I don't know how great it is, but making him a size 3 for that aura, making him unchargeable plus butterfly jump means he's real hard to take down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guns, he can still butterfly jump away from guns, but he doesn't want to get
Yeah, he's
shot.
got a little bit more. He's got an extra layer of defense versus
Yeah.
range that original Brewmaster didn't have, because that's original Brewmaster's big weakness is getting shot.
Focus fire.
Focus fire takes him down every time. All right, cool. So, did either of you have anything else to add on the schemes and strats before we wrap this up?
Not really. I would say, just as a point of reference for people listening, as to like, hey, when do I take Youko 2 over Youko 1? Like I said before, I think their strat picks are pretty much the same. Youko 1's better at Vendetta. Hidden Martyrs, she's a little bit better at. And Bait and Switch is actually one that she can pull off pretty well. So I would say, if those types of if those schemes are in your pool, I think you go for Youko 1. If you have more speed oriented schemes, or schemes that are more scheme marker oriented, like Outflank Detonate Charges are, that's when you're going to go to Youko 2.
Cool. Maeve, what about you? You have any closing thoughts?
I would say if you're planning on playing Brewmaster 2, number one, you really need to think about your unpacking, think about how you're going to set up your turn. Remember that Open the Gourd lasts until his next activation, so plan around that. You want to plan on probably activating Brewmaster early turn 1, last turn 2, early turn 3, etc. And remember that, like, don't get so caught up in Barroom Brawl and his aggressiveness to not forget that he is also a move 6 master who can drop scheme markers at 8 inches. Like, he can turn 4, turn 5 be like, points going to get scored, and go do the scoring. Like, and I think his crew is really good at that too. Like Shinobi, Moon Shinobi are move 6 as well. Like, they're insanely fast when they need to be. So, and with them the ability to just push out, like, they're 0-inch engage, which sucks, but because they can hit something and then as soon as poison triggers, push out at the end of the turn, makes them even more viable, I think.
Well, they're 0 and 2-inch engage.
Yeah, well, that's
just
fair.
Their 2-inch engage just
Right.
doesn't deal damage.
Right. So I think that you really need to lean into the flexibility of this crew, which is something that Brewmaster 1 does not do really well. He's not a very flexible master. He controls the center of the board, and that's what he does. He punches things into non-existence and controls the center of the board. This Brewmaster enables you to be much more flexible in how your crew behaves and how you behave. So that would be practice. He's probably going to take maybe not Sommer levels of figuring out all, especially with Shojo, like figuring out all those little tricks, but I would say 5 to 6 games before you start really seeing the Matrix level moves.
For sure. All right, cool. Well, I'd like to thank both my guests for joining us today. I think we had some really great thoughts on a lot of this stuff. We did a really good job of kind of bringing it up sort of, stream of consciousness. I think that we probably came to some conclusions that I hadn't even really thought about when we started recording. So
yeah,
cheers to both of you.
Cheers. It was wonderful. Thank you very much
Indeed.
for inviting us.
Yeah, for sure. So as always, I'd like to thank all of our listeners for joining us today. As always, keep your conversations boring and stay weird, folks.